Everybody, the Simple Handicap for Friday, December 20th. Thank you for making me a part of your morning. Before we get into the final market rundown for NFL week number 16, programming note, the Sunday live stream will air after Sunday Night Football between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Dallas Cowboys. That evening live stream will probably go live about 8:30 p.m. Pacific, give or take 15 minutes either way, depending on the game. Kind of once it's settled and decided, I'll go live. That show will act as usual as the Monday morning episode of the Simple Handicap. There will not be a show until later in the week. Whether it's a Friday or a Saturday morning show, we'll see how the schedule plays out, but I'm going to spare everybody the hassle of coming back to the podcast feed Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for sure. You guys are with the families. You guys are with friends. It's obviously Christmas Eve and Boxing Day. Lots going on for everybody, and so those days typically don't see a high download number in past seasons when I've tried it. So I'll do my best to keep everybody updated, but I think I'll push things back a little bit further, and we'll see what happens from there. But I just wanted to emphasize the Sunday evening show, 8:30-ish p.m. Pacific time, and I'll try to do a full week look ahead, full week summary, and combine the Sunday evening and the Wednesday morning show together. So keep that in mind. Apple, Spotify, YouTube live streams will be posted later on Sunday. With all that said, let's get to it. Week 16 continues on Saturday. Houston on the road at the Kansas City Chiefs. This number flirted with 4 for a little bit at Chris yesterday. For the most part, everywhere else hung around 3.5. The 4s got taken out quickly. We now know that Patrick Mahomes is very likely to play. It still hasn't been confirmed by anybody. We know what's happening. We know that Hollywood Brown is going to be very limited in his participation, according to both the head coach and offensive coordinator of the Kansas City Chiefs, Andy Reid and Matt Nagy. So taper expectations there. Given the left tackle concerns that now return for the Chiefs and Mahomes' reduced mobility at 3.5, you have to be looking at the Texans here. I don't know how anybody can make a case right now for the Chiefs at 3.5 because we're basically back to what the number initially opened at. I will say the sharpest bet in all of this was from another pro I know, who I know is listening. He took the 3 with the Chiefs on the other side of 3, on the other side of 0 rather. But now that you're looking at this, the last move that we've seen has been on Houston, and that would be one I think you have to consider. I would be very surprised if the Chiefs get bet again at 3.5 and this pushes up to 4. I think it's only Texans money from now until kickoff. Saturday night football, or afternoon, depending where you're located, 1:30 p.m. Pacific, 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. It's the Baltimore Ravens hosting the Pittsburgh Steelers. George Pickens out of this game, but TJ Watt in for this game. So it's a split down the middle of the injury concerns for the Pittsburgh Steelers. TJ Watt, known to the market to be more impactful. I think George Pickens, perhaps not fully known. We're sitting at 6.5, which is kind of right in the middle of what was expected if both were out or if both were in. Again, I'm looking at this and I'm just finding a hard time understanding who would want to take the Steelers at 6.5 back the other way here. And so with this number where it's sitting, there are some 6s on the board right now. Circa 6 minus 10. I don't know if we see a Steelers bet come in and this get taken off. Now that we know that Pickens is not going to be in, that is a massive blow to the Steelers offense. And I would be surprised if we see money come in and take out the 6s. I think we're kind of here to stay. Perhaps some late money on game day like we saw last week come in on the Ravens tomorrow when we get closer to kickoff. Sunday, football, Cleveland on the road at the Cincinnati Bengals. Big move yesterday. Cincinnati, 7.5s wiped out, 8.5s wiped out. We're all the way up to 9 across the board. We know, obviously, that Cincinnati has been a very popular teaser. That always gets kind of credited for the move. The fact is here, we are looking at a Cleveland Browns team with DTR starting that is just a massive downgrade from what the level of expected play could be. Jameis Winston certainly making a ton of mistakes, brings with him a lot of volatility. It was just a matter of time until the Bengals get bet. And what kind of accelerated this as we get later in the week and limits were bumped, I think was the stance knowing what DTR could be. But then you look down the injury report. David Njoku, still a DNP on Thursday. Myles Garrett, still a DNP on Thursday. Shelby Harris, still a DNP on Thursday. Injuries to key guys, the quarterback downgrade, with Bengals playing for their playoff life. This was somewhat anticipated, but you see that big move yesterday afternoon when the limits are all bumped up. and we're past the second and most important injury report of the week. That's a pretty telling move. Still has been under money at 47. I think we see that total come down in terms of the weather that we are expecting to see in this game. 31 degrees Fahrenheit, small chance of rain, very little wind, but it is going to be a little bit chilly in this game, which fair for both teams, but certainly when you think about the passing attack for Cincinnati, stands out. Now, there is going to be concern that T. Higgins is unable to play. For anybody skimming the injury report yesterday, expectations are he's back at practice today and should participate in full and is going to be good to go. It was more of a rest day than it was a downgrade of his status, which I think got a lot of folks a little bit concerned yesterday. And this move so far pretty well telling you what you need to know about the Bengals in this spot. Detroit on the road at the Chicago Bears. We haven't really seen anything in this game all week. It is still Lions minus 6.5. The total is still 48. There is Chris leaning slightly towards 7. We're seeing FanDuel lean slightly at minus 112 and minus 113. I think if there is going to be a side taken in this game, it could be the Lions up to 7. Then there might be some disagreement back the other way, but this number has stayed very stable all week and has been one of the few games all week that has been untouched. Arizona on the road at the Carolina Panthers. Still 4.5 or 5, depending where you look for the Panthers, but over money. As I talked about yesterday on the podcast, we're now seeing 47.5 at Circa. That's the highest of the week that we have seen. The 46.5 at FanDuel, I believe, is going to get taken out a little bit later today as over money continues to come into this market. Talked about using this on the Sam P video. I like the over in this game. Think we see points. Don't think it's going to be a straight line to get them, but I do think that it certainly sets up decent for both of these offenses to have success after both of this schedules for either team of the opposing defense. It's just been brutal the last couple of weeks. And so I do think that 46.5 that's left at FanDuel will be taken out as we see over money continue to leak into this market. New England on the road at the Buffalo Bills. 14 still the number across the screen for Buffalo. 46.5 remains the total across the board. This is another game of a handful this week. Is going to see cold weather as we get closer. We get a more concrete forecast that we are looking at in this game specifically being played. We are looking at very similar temperatures to the other games in the northeastern part of the country. 11 degrees Fahrenheit in Buffalo. No winds, no chance of precipitation. It's just going to be a very cold game that likely encourages both teams to keep the ball on the ground a little bit more. This is in that range that we talked about earlier in the week where this cold weather gets you that 5 to 8% passing dip for both teams, so something to keep in consideration. Drake May has been talked about a lot for rushing props. I've mentioned it a few times here on the podcast. Alex Van Pelt came out yesterday, the offensive coordinator for the New England Patriots, and said it's an effort on his part not to run May because of where they are in the season and protecting the quarterback. This is going against what Gerard Mayo wants to see happen and challenged him to happen on Monday. So all of this intrigue that I had earlier in the week with May rushing props has kind of come to an end, to put it bluntly. So that's a bit of a disappointment, as that looked like it could be a pretty good subjective angle. You have the offensive coordinator effectively shutting it down middle of the week. Philadelphia on the road at the Washington Commanders. 3.5 across the board for the Eagles. 45.5 the total across the screen. So a little bit more Eagles money between yesterday and today coming into the market. 3 was the floor, and that was the buy point back the other way. Jalen Hurts, full participant in practice for the second day in a row. A.J. Brown limited, half knee, half rest. What's the full truth? Hard to say. Devonta Smith upgraded to full after a limited participation on Wednesday. So a bit of a positive injury report for the Philadelphia Eagles after some of the expectations were looking somewhat grim on Monday, but kind of being proven wrong now. This total at 45.5, I think could see a little bit of under money between now and kickoff. New York Giants on the road at the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta still an 8.5-point favorite. Total 42 at Chris, 42.5 at Circa. This is a total that has been bet up about 1.5 points since earlier in the week. I think it makes a ton of sense with Michael Penix at quarterback. Drew Lock was upgraded to full. His first full practice in multiple weeks for the New York Giants. Malik Neighbors, also good news for the over, upgraded to full as well. His first full practice in a long time. And center John Michael Schmitz back at practice yesterday, dealing with the ankle injury. He was limited. Brian Burns should be ready according to Brian Dable, to play in this game. His status would absolutely impact this total if he's unable to go. That'll be a bit of a tick up. And Deonte Banks limited with his rib injury that is keeping him a little bit banged up in practice. And so still a bevy of new faces added to the Giants secondary. That Brian Burns news would be the last one to keep an eye on. His status would be impactful as he's one of the few guys left showing any signs of life on that Giants defense. Tennessee on the road at the Indianapolis Colts. Still Colts 3.5. Total in this game, 42.5 shaded to the over. Do think we see a touch of over money come in on this game before we get to kickoff on Sunday. LA Rams on the road at the New York Jets. Rams still a soft 3-point favorite. Total still 46.5 in this game for the New York Jets. All the issues earlier in the week were on the defensive side of the football. A lot of those in the secondary clearing up a little bit as the week goes on. Reed looks like he is going to be in line to play. Carter still 50-50 on what his status is going to be, but Clark and Adams both clear and good to go as well. So a bit of a positive switch in the secondary for the Jets after earlier in the week. It didn't look like it was Giants territory bad, but it certainly was in the same ballpark. This is another cold weather game, 26 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 miles per hour, wind blowing from the northwest. I wouldn't put too much stock into the wind. Not only is it not high enough to have a big impact, but MetLife and the dome that it is does one of the best jobs of any stadium in the league blocking out wind. I think I said dome. I meant to say bowl. I'm going to get called out on it. One of the few fields in the league I've been on a couple of times. When you're standing on that field, you are surrounded by stands, and it does a big job of blocking the wind at field level. And so MetLife wind conditions outside the stadium in that concrete slab in the middle of nowhere, you're getting pelted with the wind. You go inside the stadium, it's a lot less. But 10 degrees, nothing to make really note of. But the weather, I guess you could say, applies to the Rams. But the way that their offensive style has changed, their use of duo blocking in the run scheme and their run play calling and how physical they can be with the wide receivers blocking, and obviously Stafford, not Goff, for the last couple of seasons has really negated a lot of those outdoor concerns that an indoor team like LA should and has had in the past. Not really something I'm reading into, despite seeing some tweets about it on social. Minnesota on the road at the Seattle Seahawks. Minnesota, a soft 3-point favorite at Chris, 3 minus 0.5 at Circa. Geno Smith practices in full for the second day in a row. And big news for the Seahawks, they get Kenneth Walker back, practicing in full as well. Bit surprised we haven't seen some threes taken out. Market certainly leaning that way at a couple of the sharper books today. It is not a great spot for Minnesota travel schedule-wise. I have a hard time believing that somebody wants to take Minnesota here at 3 and bet this up. I get the feeling we might see some Seahawks money come in if the injury report continues to trend a little bit better. Now that Kenneth Walker is back practicing in full, I would expect his props to be pretty interesting given all the comments from McDonald this week about running the football as well and wanting to run it more early in games and thinking about what they need to do to maybe take some stress off of Geno, but also stabilize the O-line and take advantage of a Vikings defense. It's a little bit noisy in their numbers when it comes to the rush defense just because they've been in the lead for so many minutes in so many different games this season. It just skews it a bit. It's labeled as like number 3 or 4. It's not that. And if you want to attack this defense, you really have to find a ground game. Weather for Seattle, it's December. It's Seattle. 50% chance of rain in the first quarter, and that gets up to as high as 98% as the game goes on. Some websites have it labeled as definite rain. In terms of some of the weather reports that I always look at, Kevin Roth is always very important when you're looking at his label for this game specifically. He has it as a yellow, so it didn't get the orange treatment, but it is showers throughout. It's not like significant downpours and significant rain, but you just have an ugly kind of Pacific Northwest Seattle type of game that is certainly going to be different for Minnesota to play in coming from the Dome. And so where I don't think there's a big impact for a team like the Rams going on the road to face the Jets, I do think Minnesota gets impacted by it a little bit in these conditions, which are obviously a little bit more conducive for a slight bump in rush rate than anything. And so that Walker angle, given the early week commentary, and I know it's something that McDonald and Grubb have gone back and forth a lot over the last few weeks, and it's not uncommon as a Seahawks fan to hear this. The Geno injury, I think, accelerates that a little bit, as does the opponent. San Francisco on the road at the Miami Dolphins. Still 49ers money into the market. We're down to a pick 'em. We started 2.5 earlier this week. It's come all the way down. 2-point move here on San Francisco. There has been no buyback all week on the Miami Dolphins. Total still 44.5 across the screen. Jacksonville on the road at the Las Vegas Raiders. Raiders as high as 2 at Chris. 1.5 at every other sportsbook on the screen. Total 40.5 on this game. Jacoby Myers status 1 to watch. If he gets in a full practice today, Aiden O'Connell is practicing in full and is going to start for the Las Vegas Raiders. The last time we saw O'Connell play against a defense that runs a amount of man coverage comparable to what he's going to see with the elevated man rates of Jacksonville was the Kansas City Chiefs. And O'Connell sat in the pocket and was a very willing thrower. We have seen some wide receivers and quarterbacks have monster games against the Jaguars in the last few weeks. As the season winds down, the defense continues to struggle. I would think that there are going to be some intriguing long shot flyer prices on passing yards leader for O'Connell, receiving yards leader for either Bowers or Myers against this Jags defense. You get the Raiders playing indoors in a dome, and you think about these other games. Joe Burrow playing outdoors in the cold against Cleveland. You have Buffalo playing outdoors as a massive favorite against the New England Patriots. You have Philadelphia and Washington in a tight division battle outdoors in a bit of cold. You have the New York Jets and the LA Rams outdoors in the cold. Minnesota, Seattle outdoors in the cold. These explosive teams that have put up big numbers, a lot of them I think impacted or at least throttled back a little bit by weather. Obviously Mayfield and the Buccaneers and the numbers they've put up indoors concerning for that Dallas game. Arizona, Carolina, both have potential for big games. Detroit, Chicago, outdoors, impacted by cold. So you maybe bring that down a little bit too. And then the Packers are playing in a snow game on Monday night. And I look at some of these other indoor games this week. Giants, Atlanta. Are you getting a massive game from Penix or Locke? Tennessee, Indy. Are you getting a massive game from Richardson or Rudolph? I think there's a case to be made here that the Raiders could explode a little bit, especially O'Connell being a willing thrower and some of these wide receivers. Last week, Adams had 198 against this Jags defense. He would have got that prop and hit as the winner. Just something to keep in mind as these prices come out a little bit later today. As mentioned, Tampa Bay on the road at the Dallas Cowboys. 3.5 circa for Chris, 4 Buckeye, 4 at FanDuel as well. 48.5 is the total, shaded to the under. Not a lot of news or notes to say on this one. It's been Dallas money. A little bit surprising to me holding this one down from the initial peak earlier this week of 4.5. And then Monday Night Football, Saints on the road at the Packers. 14.5s are gone. We're back to 14 for the Packers across the screen. 42 is the total. Alvin Kamara is out. Spencer Rattler will start as expected. Kendre Miller props ought to be interesting for this game. Can he get enough production before the game state inevitably gets out of hand for him in this game? That will do it for me today. I hope everybody has a fantastic Friday, and that Sunday evening live stream will go live after the Buccaneers and Cowboys game is decided. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy Sunday. We'll chat to you Sunday evening.